Destroying Media Narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:09 p.m. in Central Europe. And you know what I'm going to say next? It's really dismal. The days are kind of fast disappearing into an ether. And, the grim months of short, pointless, sunless days are really upon us now. And there's no getting around it now. So it's really very, very dismal here. However, welcome everybody who has joined me. And we really, really appreciate your being here. There's somebody saying here, says that George is mostly preoccupied with chatting to the Rumble ladies rather than dear YouTube. That's not true. I chat with the locals subscribers, and that's what I do here, is to encourage all of our listeners and all of our participants to join our locals channel, which is thegaggle.locals.com. Thegaggle.locals.com. And so if you join, you don't even have to pay a fee. I'm very, very generous here. Ideally, you will pay a subscription fee, but you don't have to. But if you join, then you will get the benefit of my taking the trouble of answering your questions. But if you're just on YouTube, then I'm very happy to have you on YouTube. But obviously, I have to deal with the locals subscribers, because they took the trouble to subscribe to our channels on locals. So they need a reward. So you want me to chat amiably with you, then please join our locals channel, thegaggle.locals.com. Please do it. So it's now 3:12 p.m. on the East Coast of the United States, and Vladimir Zelensky is meeting with President Biden to present his plan for victory. And so we've already talked about that. It's a plan for victory. It's not really any kind of a victory that he's planning. I mean, it's essentially a way of entangling the United States in Ukraine's war with the obvious intent to trigger a direct war between the NATO, meaning the United States, and Russia. Hence the wish list of all kinds of things. Obviously, pride of place goes to the lifting of restrictions on the use of nuclear, not nuclear, on the use of missiles, long distance American missiles and British and French missiles on Russian territory once the restrictions lifted on that, so that then Ukraine can attack Russia, with the obvious goal that this will provoke a Russian response, and which in turn will provoke a direct NATO intervention and a direct NATO war with Russia. That's Zelensky's plan for victory. He knows perfectly well he cannot win this war. He can drag it out, and that's clearly has been his strategy. It's been the strategy of NATO: drag it out as long as possible, inflict as much damage on Russia, but also on Ukraine as possible, kill as many Ukrainians and Russians as possible, downgrade Russia as any kind of a global power, degrade Russia's military, inflict huge economic damage on Russia. That's the NATO strategy, and Zelensky has been very happy to play his role in it. Now, not in none of these plans is there any serious expectation that Ukraine can defeat Russia. Obviously, it can't defeat Russia. And despite all of the pronouncements of Biden and Blinken and the rest of them as if somehow, oh, Ukraine is going to defeat Russia, Boris Johnson, the rest. What they really mean is keep this war going. And that is obviously what they want, and that's why that's the plan for victory. So he says, yeah, lift the restrictions on the missiles, give us the air defense systems, and fast track our membership in the EU, and of course invite us in to NATO. And while Biden, may say, yeah, we, fine, join NATO. Biden will not be able to get all of NATO to agree. I mean, there'll be obviously the Baltics, Poland, Great Britain. They'll agree to Ukraine in NATO. Some of these insignificant little countries in Western Europe, the Benelux countries, they'll probably go along with it. Yeah, bring them in. But it's very unlikely that many other countries. I don't think Germany would agree to having Ukraine in NATO. Obviously, Hungary, Slovakia is not going to agree. I don't think Italy is going to agree. I don't think France is going to agree. So it's not really a feasible plan, even if Biden says, yeah, I'm all for Ukraine in NATO. So that's going to happen later today. And I mean, it may in fact be happening right now. So that it wasn't clear what time this is going to happen. And then Zelensky was going to talk to Harris. Now, Zelensky's in a little bit of a pickle here because he's now become identified with justice as a supplicant of the Democratic Party, and it's understandable why he's done so. Remember, Zelensky could have gone in with Trump. He could have helped Trump out during the impeachment. He could have been much more vigorous. After all, the telephone conversation that was at the heart of the impeachment was with him. And so he could have made absolutely clear to everybody that no, there was no talk in this conversation. And I never understood in this conversation that I was supposed to dig up dirt on Biden or anything like that. He could have done it. He didn't do it. He didn't do anything to help Trump during that impeachment. And he's kind of completely identified himself with the Democrats. And then he made the sort of the faux pas of criticizing J.D. Vance in that interview with the New Yorker. And then, of course, he went to Pennsylvania, went to that munitions factory, signed the missiles, along with Governor Josh Shapiro, who was obviously a part, the front team of the Democrats. He was, obviously, one of the strongest candidates for the running mate slot for Harris. So that whole thing, that visit to the munitions factory, was an event for the Democratic Party. It was clearly an election stunt for the Democratic Party. So the Republicans are really very unhappy about that. But of course, they're not really going to do much about it. But Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, has called on the Ukraine ambassador to be fired. Well, that isn't going to happen. It's not up to him to fire Ukraine ambassador. I mean, and really, I don't know what role the Ukraine ambassador really played in all of that. But nonetheless, it was the Democrats, and Zelensky went along with it. And Zelensky is shrewd enough to know that the Republicans were going to take that amiss, as in fact they did. However, I don't think that this is necessarily that significant. I do think that this may be a storm in a teacup. And keep in mind, in the last few days, Trump has said some quite negative things about Ukraine. He suggested, first of all, that Zelensky should have taken a deal, and that there was a deal on the table that he didn't take. I mean, Trump wasn't quite specific what he meant by that. I mean, maybe he meant Minsk. He may have meant the Istanbul Accords, but nonetheless, that was clearly a shot across the bow from Trump. And then Trump talked about Napoleon and Hitler and how they really didn't fare very well fighting against Russia. So that again would suggest that he's saying, look, Ukraine really doesn't have a hope. Russians are very good at fighting, and you're not going to defeat Russia. So, he said that, and then of course now it's clear that there's going to be no meeting between Trump and Zelensky during Zelensky's trip. Now, I said I thought it was a storm in a teacup because in the sense that while it's true that the Republicans are really tired of Zelensky, because they just see Zelensky as a creature of the Democrats, even though the Republicans had, by and large, signed off on lots and lots of billions of aid for Ukraine. Admittedly, in that the last vote for the $61 billion appropriation, half of the House Republicans voted against it. Nonetheless, it passed. It passed, with the help of the Republicans. So they say, well, what the hell's Zelensky doing? Why is he sort of cozying up with the Democrats? But the question then is, what kind of an impact will this have on Trump? And I just don't know that it will. I don't know what goes on in the mind of Trump, because remember, he knew when he had that conversation with Zelensky, he knew very well that the Bidens and all their Democrat friends had done very well in Ukraine. They'd made a ton of money in Ukraine. He knew about the sleaze, the corruption. He knew about Hunter Biden, and that's why he asked Zelensky, tell us what the hell had been going on there, which again was his absolute right to do. Even as a citizen, the First Amendment protects your right to seek information. The whole idea that, you can't do that because that somehow in an election year you're digging up dirt about your political opponent. Yeah, that's protected by the First Amendment, and that protects whether you're the president or just an ordinary citizen. You have the right, the unconditioned right, to seek information about anything, anywhere. That's part of the First Amendment. First Amendment isn't just your right to speak freely. It's your right to seek out information. And that's what Trump did. I mean, he was seeking information about what the Bidens had been up to. So he did that. And he knew, therefore, that Ukraine, that the post-2014, post-Maidan Ukraine had been in bed with the Democrats. He knew that Obama was behind the coup that overthrew the legitimate government of Ukraine. And yet, nonetheless, Trump, was the one who started sending lethal weapons to Ukraine. And he, perfectly reasonably, had held up a massive arms package to Ukraine. You remember Congress had passed this appropriations. It was something like $500 million, a nice chunk of change for Ukraine. And then Trump held it up. Now, again, this was his constitutional responsibility. With there's a separation of powers in the United States, and in accordance with the separation of powers, foreign policy um, lies within the jurisdiction of the president. The president makes foreign policy, and if the president decides that $500 million is not a great idea, sending that $500 million to Ukraine is not a great idea, then the president is perfectly entitled to put a halt to it. It doesn't matter that it was appropriated by Congress. The president is not a rubber stamp. He's not a rubber stamp for Congress. Congress, as if, Congress passed it, so therefore I'm under an obligation then to just send this money. And so he put a stop to it. Now that, and this of course was the key ingredient of the impeachment of Trump, even though, as I say, it was within his constitutional prerogative. But the problem was that Trump kind of then released the money. That moment he said, okay, I'm holding this up. I don't think it's in America's interest for Ukraine to get all these arms, because Ukraine is going to be using these arms against Russia. Remember, this was money that was going to Ukraine long before the start of the Russia's so-called special military operations. So this was 2019. So that's just $500 million. $500 million for what? What were they planning on? Well, of course, they were planning on war. So that's why, obviously, this was long before Russia's invasion, because the Americans were planning for war and they were sending all this arms to Ukraine. And given that a war between Russia and Ukraine would obviously affect American interests, an American president is perfectly entitled to say, I don't think I'm going to sign off on this because I think this is endangering American security. So he could have held the line on that. He should have done, but he didn't. And then so after holding it up, I think for a few weeks, he released the money. And that's the problem. That why I'd love to think that this this kind of contretemps between Trump and Zelensky could presage a serious break between the United States and Ukraine, but I'm not sure. Again, no one really knows what Trump really thinks. So he says these things, good things, but we don't know what he's going to do. I mean, he said good things before the November 2016 election, and then he kind of went back on it. So yeah, I liked it when he said, "Oh, Zelensky is this great state salesman. Whenever he comes here, he walks away with $100 billion," and then saying, "Hey, he should have basically taken the deal." So we don't know. I posted a podcast yesterday dealing with this prank call to Radek Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister. So in this prank call by Wovan and Lexus, the two Russian comedians pretended to be Poroshenko, and so Sikorski was obviously taken in by it, and so he talked to someone he believed to be Poroshenko, and he said there that that he, Sikorski, had talked to Trump's people, and the Trump's people, he didn't specify who among the Trump's people that he talked to, but that what Trump will do as president is to escalate the war with Russia. He would really escalate America's involvement to such an extent that Russia will back down. The problem with that, I'm not buying that. I don't believe it. First of all, I don't know that the person he spoke to has any idea what's going on in Trump's mind. So we don't know. He says all these top people, but a lot of people claim to be close to Trump. But also, this is what Sikorsky thinks. Sikorsky, has this ridiculous, blustery, uh, uh, faux toughness of the Poles that somehow, well, all you need to do with the Russians is, get tough with them, shake your fist at them, and they'll back down. He's always going on about how weak the Russians really are. They pretend to be strong, but they're weak. We beat them in the war in 1920 and so on. Yeah, but you got absolutely thumped in World War II, and the Russians had to liberate you, and then the Russians kept you down for for 45 years, and so you know stop dining out on what happened in 1920. But that's his thing. So whoever was speaking to Sikorsky probably knew, well, that's what Sikorsky wants to hear, and so you tell Sikorsky what he wants to hear. Alternatively, of course, Sikorsky may be lying, which I think is also a safe bet. That that's what Sikorsky is doing. Okay. Well, all right. Let's take first of all look at some of the comments, and then I'll talk some more. So let's see what the locals, the people who are on locals, as I said, the people who are the subscribers to our locals channel, which I encourage everybody to do. Please join. So Danaki says, Kedvesh George, dear George, will the idiotic psycho-Zionist magatards start a war with Iran if they win Congress and the White House? Trump is having an increasingly unhinged and bellicose discourse over Iran and anti-Semitism. Well, very, very good question, because we had this very strange event, I think yesterday, when Trump was briefed by Avril Haines, who's the director of national intelligence. Basically, she's an Obama creature, and she said that Iran was plotting, or at least that's what she appears to have told Trump, that Iran is plotting to assassinate him, Trump. Now, we heard this before. At the time of the first assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania, within days, the government came out and said, "Oh well, we've had these warnings that Iran was planning to assassinate Trump." They didn't say that Matthew Crooks, the first would-be assassin, was working for Iran. But they said, no, Iran is out to get him. And then we also had the story, that strange story about Iran having hacked Trump's campaign and passed on information from Trump's campaign to the Democrats. But the Democrats, for some strange reason, some strange noble reason, decided not to use it. That's the story that came out. And now this has been elaborated on with this briefing for Trump, telling him, "Oh, the Iranians are out to assassinate you." And so then Trump came out with this somewhat unhinged rant about Iran, and then saying something like, "Well, if he had heard this and he had been president, then he would have threatened Iran with bombing of all their cities and destruction of their country and so on." So it was completely unhinged. And then he claimed, Trump, and I think it was in his speech in North Carolina, he claimed that the two assassination attempts were actually orchestrated by Iran. And I don't think, as far as we can tell, I don't think Avril Haines had actually said that to him. But either way, what I think is very troubling about all of this is the fact that Trump is proving to be so gullible has to accept at face value these kinds of briefings. I mean, has he forgotten about the briefings that he received when he was running in 2016? These highly misleading briefings. Because remember, this was written about by that guy who was, his name escapes me. He was the partner of Paul Manafort. So it was Paul Manafort. He had this business partnership with, I think his name was it? I think it was Gates. I think Gates. I mean, I can't remember his first name, but I think it was Gates. But Gates wrote in his memoirs that when they had these briefings, and he attended the briefing, Trump was there, and as was Michael Flynn. And after the briefing was over, Flynn turned to them and says, well, what the hell was that? That wasn't a briefing. That was an intelligence surveillance operation. They came, it was clear to him because Flynn, he was an experienced intelligence person. And he knew what a briefing was and what a briefing wasn't. And what Trump was getting was clearly not a briefing, that they came to him, with apparently with the the security threats facing the United States. But he said, no, that wasn't what happened here. What happened here was that these people who came allegedly to do a briefing were actually conducting a surveillance operation, which of course that's exactly what they were. They were surveilling Trump's campaign. So they weren't doing any kind of briefing. So, Trump knows the FBI, the CIA, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which was that was a job held by Clapper. They are not his friends. So when they tell him, "Oh, Iran is out to get you," you would think Trump would be very skeptical, as he seemed to be during his first term. Remember, he was berated after that meeting in Helsinki for apparently believing Russian claims about Russian interference in the 2016 election. He believed Russia's claims more than the claims of the intelligence agencies, his own intelligence agencies, and everyone, of course, took Trump to task for that. Including all his hacks at Fox News. But of course, Trump was absolutely right. Why would he believe anything that his own intelligence agencies were saying to him? Because it's those very same intelligence agencies that were seeking to overthrow him. And they've been seeking to overthrow him ever since 2015, 2016. So of course, he didn't believe anything that they claimed, particularly on the idea that somehow he won the 2016 election thanks to the help of Russia. So now they come to him and tell him, oh, Iran is out to get you. Iran is seeking to assassinate you. Now, that's a very serious charge. And anyone, aspiring to be president would be very skeptical of this, is saying, whoa, I mean, for Iran to try to do that, that would be a very big deal because Iran is a very cautious power. It doesn't take too many risks, and it's not going to do something so dangerous and so reckless as to assassinate a former president and a leading presidential candidate because of the consequences that would ensue for Iran were the plot uncovered. I mean, if the plot is uncovered, then Iran will be in American crosshairs. There are more than plenty of people in the United States who want to have a final war with Iran to settle all outstanding scores and to absolutely destroy the rule of the Ayatollahs. They would be chomping at the bit to seize on this, an assassination of a presidential candidate, to go to war with Iran. Now, the Iranians are not stupid, and they know that That's what the Americans would be thinking. So why would they provide essentially a gun to the Americans by anything as reckless as plotting to kill Trump? And that's why, if anyone who was serious would say, "Hey, I'm not buying what Avril Haines is selling. Avril Haines is an Obama hack. She was in with all of those horrible creatures in the Obama team: Susan Rice, Samantha Power, Lisa Monaco. They were all part of that Obama team, all of whom were out to destroy Trump, all of them. So now Trump is accepting this and is issuing all sorts of threats against Iran based on what they tell him. I mean, if at least he had been briefed by Michael Flynn, you can say, okay, well, he trusts Michael Flynn. I'm not saying I wouldn't believe what Flynn said, but nonetheless, that would be something. But you're going to go by the word of Avril Haines. So I'm not buying for one moment that Iran is doing this. I think there is clearly a plan. I would suspect this was a plan, a trap for Trump, and Trump seemed to have walked into the trap by issuing these crazy, unhinged threats against Iran. This is not going to win him any votes because if you're running as the non-interventionist, anti-interventionist candidate, the guy who wants to focus on domestic issues, you want to build up America's economy. I mean, you've been saying this for 10 years. Then you don't want to start threatening going to war against Iran. I mean, that's a big deal. Going to war against Iran. It's a big country, 90 million. They have lots of missiles. It's a big, difficult undertaking to go to war against Iran, and therefore, I think this was a trap that was laid for Trump, and Trump walked right into it by issuing these ridiculous, hysterical statements. Because how the hell do they even know that Iran is making these these plans? Who's providing this quote intelligence unquote? Well, Israel. Israel, of course, would be providing it because, of course, it's always been Israel's dream to provoke a war between Iran and the United States. And then this is the way to do it. Oh, well, okay, Iran is plotting to kill the president. So these completely unhinged declarations. And again, Trump even went further, as I said earlier. Trump even went further because it's not clear, at least according to the newspaper reports, that Avril Haines had said that the two previous assassination attempts had been orchestrated by Iran, even though that's what Trump said in his speech in North Carolina. So he's gone, over the top there. And then, the anti-Semitism and these strange issues that somehow Israel will cease to exist, and that Biden and Harris overseeing the destruction of Israel, and that the Jews, if they don't vote for Trump, will in effect be signing off on the destruction of Israel, and that if the Jews don't vote for Trump, they will be responsible for everything that has happened, that will happen to Israel. And so he's doing the Biden shtick of 2020. If you don't vote for me, you ain't black. And then he's doing that. If you don't vote for me, you ain't Jewish. I don't know whether people watched. I think it was yesterday on Steve Bannon's show. Bannon, he's not hosting his show at the moment because he's in prison for the failure to respond to a subpoena. So he'll be out, I think, just before the election. But anyway, he has guest hosts, and the guest host was Peter Navarro. And Peter Navarro, like Bannon, like a lot of these right-wing Republicans, of course, takes the view that all glory to Israel, because he's not a Jew. Navarro's not a Jew. Bannon's not a Jew. Again, none of them is evangelical. Well, Bannon obviously isn't. I don't know about Navarro, but of course they're fervent supporters of Israel. And of course, they subscribe to this nonsensical theory that somehow Biden is throwing Israel under the bus. But anyway, Navarro had on Naomi Wolf, who used to be kind of she was a Democrat. I think she had some big job on the Al Gore campaign in 2000. I don't know whether she was the campaign manager, but I think she had some role in the Gore campaign. But anyway, she used to be a fairly reliable liberal Democrat. But somehow under COVID, she kind of fell out of favor with the Democrats. She really didn't buy into the COVID story. She didn't buy into the mandatory vaccination. So she kind of made her way into the Steve Bannon circle. So she's in good odor with the team, with Team Bannon. So Navarro had her on, and because she's Jewish, and he wanted to know Navarro, what the hell is wrong with these Jews? Don't they see what the Democrats are doing to Israel, and don't they see that Trump is really the only hope that Israel has? What the hell's the matter with them? And she said there that, well, you have to understand that, American Jews are not primarily thinking about Israel. American Jews feel themselves to be an oppressed minority in America. And they as a minority in America are like, they're facing the same kind of threats to their existence that Jews have historically faced throughout their history. And at all times, Jews have always faced the threats. They're an oppressed minority. They get blamed for all the troubles of the world, and they're always set upon. And so the problem is that the Republicans, they're all very, they parade themselves as if somehow America is a Christian country, and therefore when they say America is a Christian country, then Jews feel very frightened because they think that this will be again Christians are going to be persecuting Jews, and so that's why the Jews feel more comfortable with Democrats, and that was it. Navarro completely lost his cool on that, because of course he wasn't going to buy at all. He didn't. What he should, of course, have said that the whole idea that Jews in America are under any kind of threat is absolutely ridiculous. But he didn't quite go there, because in a way he is saying the Jews are under threat, but the threats are coming from the left and the Palestinians and the Palestinian supporters. But here was this person, Naomi Wolf, who had been invited in to the inner sanctum of Bannon world. She was now part of Bannon world. Now she's saying that the real threat to the Jews in America are not the left, but Republican Christians who want to either turn America into a theocracy, and then the Jews will be banished, exiled, and maybe even worse, sent to the gas chambers, which is what she was implying. And Navarro, of course, just lost it. He said, well, how are Christians in any way a threat to the Jews? And then she started getting very agitated and said, well, the way Trump is talking about the Jews makes all Jews very, very uncomfortable. Because when he talks like this about how the Jews will be to blame for whatever happens to them, namely what he says, it'll be up to, the Jews will be to blame for whatever happens to Israel. That's the talk. That's the talk of, preceding the banishment and annihilation and destruction of the Jews. So Navarro clearly wasn't expecting this. He was expecting a nice attack on how ridiculous and hypocritical the Jews are. But instead, he got this attack on the Christians, that somehow the Christians were the main threat facing the Jews. American Christians were the threat facing the Jews. And this really was a little bit much, because the American Christians have been great friends of the Jews. They've embraced the Jews. And of course, they're the big supporters of Israel. So this interview was cut short. Navarro was clearly very upset about that. She was very upset by Navarro's responses to her. But I thought it was just very interesting, because it does raise the question, and we touched on it a little bit during the live stream on Monday, about the American Jews. I mean, because American Jews, we have to be honest about it, American Jews care very passionately about Israel. The American Jews that we kind of like and admire, Chomsky or Finkelstein or Aaron Mate or Max Blumenthal, who have been very critical of Israel, they're a minority. They're not, in the mainstream of American Jewry. So Jews, by and large, do care very deeply about Israel, and Jews, by and large, vote for the Democrats, and not, and the Democrats are far from being hostile to Israel. They're very pro-Israel, maybe not as intensely pro-Israel as the Republicans, but nonetheless, there's never a moment when the Democrats are holding back on any money, aid, support for Israel. They're always toddling off to Israel and falling to their knees before Netanyahu, or going to the Wailing Wall and everything else, bowing their heads and everything. So Democrats do that as much as Republicans, but nonetheless, Republicans probably more than the Democrats. So it is a question: why don't Jews vote more for the Republicans? And that the question there is really, there's no easy answer to that. I mean, there are obviously all sorts of issues. I mean, I think there's a lot of there is a real disdain among American Jews towards Middle America. There's no question about that. There is part of it is there is a lot of disdain. They regard them as buffoons, the goyim, and so on, and find it difficult at all to identify with them. Now, Naomi Wolf tried to present it as if somehow, well, this Middle America is very Christian, and they want to turn America into a Christian country, and in a Christian country, Jews don't feel safe. I mean, they wouldn't quite put it in that way, but they just think, well, these goyim are really stupid, and we can't really be associated with stupid people. I mean, I think that that's part of it. I think obviously more and more complicated explanations for it. But Trump's frustration is understandable, because he did do more for the Jews than any other president has. And probably disastrously so. It was probably because of what Trump had done in the Middle East, that essentially, basically just arranged for a kind of recognition for Israel by one Arab country after another, without doing anything for the Palestinians. So, in other words, the Palestinian problem just simply evaporates. It doesn't exist because nobody talks about it, nobody addresses it, and no one cares about it, and therefore that's it. There's no more Palestinian problem. I mean, if you don't talk about it and you don't think about it, then does a Palestinian problem exist? And that was kind of the Trump plan, with the Abraham Accords, and of course then Biden sought to expand upon it by arranging the Saudi Arabia, Israel, friendship treaty or whatever, but at least at the very least, a Saudi recognition of Israel. So that almost certainly led to October the 7th. Palestinians weren't just simply going to say, hey, we don't exist anymore. They were obviously not going to accept we don't exist anymore. But nonetheless, Trump will say, yeah, but I gave, as he says, I gave I gave Israel the Golan Heights, as if the Golan Heights were his to give to anyone. And I kicked the PLO out of Washington. I withdrew from the UNRWA, or at least I withdrew American funding from UNRWA. I moved the embassy to Jerusalem, recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. I withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran. What more would you want from me? I mean, no other president had done this, and still the Jews didn't vote for him. And so he naturally gets agitated by this. But he puts it in a kind of ridiculous way, whereby he's suggesting that the survival of Israel is on the line, and if you don't vote for me, then Israel may not exist. I mean, I don't quite know how that would happen, but that's the way he presents it. But I mean, his frustration with the Jews is kind of long-standing when it comes to Republicans. Nixon had the same attitude. Now, Nixon, I think, did have a dislike of the Jews, which Trump doesn't have. I mean, Trump has been, he's lived in New York all his life. I mean, he's worked with Jews every day of his life in New York, in the real estate business and so on. And so, he's never been upset with the Jews. But Nixon was, he didn't really care or like the Jews particularly. And but he also felt, I did all this for Israel, and they don't appreciate what I did. All that I did for Israel, particularly that airlift in 1973 when Israel was facing catastrophic defeat. I saved Israel from catastrophic defeat, and still the Jews don't support me. The Jews want to see me defeated and impeached over Watergate. So, Trump's complaints, have long roots. Anyway, Ninotchka goes on. Also, if Russia is waging an existential war against the whole West in Ukraine, why would companies like Saab announce their plans to set up factories in Ukraine that could get blown up by the proverbial Kinjal in a second, unless they got security guarantees from esteemed POS shot callers like Shoigu? No, I think that's I think reasonable. What Russia's again claiming that we're fighting this war. It's an existential war against the West. And that's fair enough. I think it is. But the peculiarity of what Russia is doing is that it's actually fighting against Ukraine. I mean, it's actually destroying Ukraine, killing Ukrainians. The problem there is that at the end result will be fewer Ukrainians in existence, and of course fewer Russians in existence. But NATO will continue as before. NATO will survive because NATO isn't getting directly involved. NATO is waging a proxy war. NATO is very good at that. NATO knows how to wage proxy wars. Americans have been doing it for decades. And a proxy war means that somebody else is going to be doing the dying. You will achieve your goals vicariously through somebody else's sacrifice. And that's what's really happening in Ukraine. And it's very peculiar as well in this case because Russia has always claimed reasonably that Ukraine is part of Russian world. It's the Russian world. It's a one civilization, like saying we're one people. So, therefore you're killing off this one people. Now, the thing about hitting these Saab factories, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you're serious about winning this war and bringing it to a conclusion, you have to then make sure that nobody builds any new plants at all. You make sure that you actually destroy any infrastructure. I mean, the point is that you have to make clear to your opponents that you're not going to tolerate anything. And that's how the Americans would fight their wars. I mean, the Americans, when they do their shock and awe, they are making clear that they mean business, and they're not just going to allow you to live a normal life while there is bombing going on. So that's why from the start, whenever Americans launch their attacks, whether it's in Yugoslavia, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's Libya, they immediately target the leaders. They immediately want to assassinate the leaders. And then, of course, they immediately go after the electric grid. They hit the infrastructure so to prevent their adversaries from living any kind of a normal life. Now, Zelensky has been traveling around the world for the past 2.5 years. He's in New York now. He goes from one country to another. He's always on a kind of some kind of a junket. Now, again, can you imagine the Americans allowing Milosevic to say fly around? I think I'll go to Moscow now. I think I'll see if I can rustle up a little bit of support from my friends in Italy or something. It just wouldn't happen. If Milosevic tried to get on a plane, the Americans would just blow the plane up in the sky. And that's why this strange thing of they setting up factories. Why are you allowing essentially Ukraine to be living this normal life? Shouldn't your first order of business be to destroy any hope that Ukraine can live a normal life while it's pursuing this goal, which Ukraine is pursuing a goal, of joining NATO? I mean, that's the whole point. The whole point of what Russia is trying to do is to make clear that as long as you pursue this goal of NATO membership, we're going to make you suffer. We're going to make you pay an ever steeper price, so that you finally say, no, it makes no sense for us to pursue NATO membership. But if you can build factories in Ukraine untroubled, make some money for Saab, then what is the point? Then that war can just continue. They can just, well, look, we've got a business here, and then you've got and it's more serious than that, because Ukraine is also building missile factories inside the country. So we have missile factories in Ukraine, and we have arms factories being built in Ukraine. And you think, whoa, how can you do this? How can you allow missile factories to be built? I mean, should your first order of business be you start bombing before they break ground to build this factory? I mean, it's the whole idea. Well, we're not going to, Europeans are saying we're not going to export arms anymore because we'll just build these arms inside Ukraine, and then yeah, wouldn't you want to destroy those factories right away? So yeah, you're right. It becomes this peculiar kind of non-war that we're witnessing. Anyway, thank you, Danoki. And then Danrock says, apropos of what Danoki said about Trump's speech, Danrock says that's an insane speech. Imagine if anyone says they can blow cities up to smithereens, anyone other than U.S. or Israel. No, I think that's right, and that's why I think that that the intelligence agencies had set a trap for Trump. They knew Trump would go there. They knew Trump would then start talking in this way about smashing cities to smithereens, and that he was likely to lose votes. Because I really don't think too many Americans, other than again the sort of the supporters of Israel, who either they're already voting for Trump or they're like Jews who can't stand Trump. But the rest, that so it wouldn't in any way affect them one way or the other. But for the rest of the country, the prospect of going to war against Iran is not very alluring. I mean, they look at the map, they say, look, Iran is a very big country. We've already got one war we're involved in, which is in Gaza. We've got another one in Ukraine. And now what Trump is planning to open up a third war. So I think this was a setup. They set Trump up. They knew he would go ballistic if they said that, oh, Iran is trying to assassinate you. And then that's why he made that ridiculous speech. Marty, thank you very much. Thank you for your generosity. Really appreciate it. Cynthia, it's always good to see you, Cynthia. So a resident film expert who came up with the idea that we should have a screening of westerns and noir westerns, and so that's now posted on the Gaggle, the poll. So I encourage everyone either to join the Gaggle, take part in the poll to decide which western and noir western we should screen next Monday, and then the Monday after that we'll screen the runner-up. So put your vote there, but thank you, Cynthia, for the idea. And so Cynthia says, Ari Ninotchka, I got the distinct impression that she didn't believe the courts would rule in Russia's favor. It didn't help that Swana manipulated. Swana is I can't remember what was her rank. Was she a countess or a duchess? I can't remember. Swana manipulated her into believing that the case would be tied up in court for years, costing her lots of money by having to hire lawyers to defend her case, which is why she agreed to leave Leon and take the jewels back to Russia, where they could be sold in order to buy enough bread to feed her people, assuming the need ever arises. Well, I mean, a couple of things about that. I don't know whether she brought the jewels back to Russia, because the whole point of this journey to Paris was to sell the jewels. I mean, the jewels were already in Russia. There's no point in having the jewels in Russia. They needed hard cash. That was the whole point. Russia badly needed hard cash at that time, and that's why they went to Paris to sell the jewels. So I don't know whether they took the jewels back to Russia, or maybe they just gave it to somebody. The person, the merchant we saw at the beginning, who would handle the sale. So maybe they gave it to him. He promised he could handle the sale, so he would handle the sale. But that's not, that doesn't matter. The point is that for her, she was supposed to be so smart, but I couldn't see how Swana, the Duchess, could win the case, or either case. I mean, how could she win the case claiming that she's the rightful owner of the jewels, because the Soviet state had expropriated the jewels from her family? You can argue that that was unjust, and the Soviet government acted unlawfully in seizing her jewels. Nonetheless, that's what they did. You know, they came to power with the idea of nationalizing all property, and that's what they did. Now, France had already recognized the Soviet Union at that by then. France was among the first countries to recognize the Soviet Union sometime in the early 1920s. So therefore, France recognized the legality of the decisions of the Soviet government. May not agree with them, but it would the legality of it. So if you know, if the Duchess or the you know, goes to court in France and says, "Oh, these are my jewels," then the French courts would say, "We are not in any position to make a determination like that." The French courts would say, if you want to petition the Soviet government, then you have to make your case in the Soviet courts. But the French courts have no jurisdiction as to the ownership of this of these jewels. So therefore, they will say these jewels are clearly the property of the Soviet government, of, you know, Ninotchka and those three idiots who, you know, they had the possession of them. They got it through the Soviet government. They are the rightful owners. She can go and petition, but only in the Soviet courts. The French courts cannot make that decision. And that was a fairly obvious. She's supposed to be so smart, and she would have seen that there was no way that the Duchess or Countess could win her case in the French courts on that issue. But the second clause is that she broke into her hotel room and stole the jewels. So then the police would have to investigate her, and then she would face criminal prosecution. I mean, I don't think she'd be facing imprisonment, but nonetheless, she would have to face prosecution for having broken into a hotel room and stolen the jewels. I mean, she'd say, "Oh, but they're my jewels." I say, "No, they're not your jewels. You know, they were clearly in the possession of these representatives of the Soviet government." So she would be twice in real trouble with the French courts. So if I were you know, Ninotchka, I would simply say, well, you're going to lose. You're going to lose twice over. You're going to lose on the issue of who's the rightful owner of the jewels, and you're going to lose on the issue of you having broken into my room and taken the jewels. So it was just strange for her. She's supposed to be so smart that that she just simply got on a plane, gave everything up, and then returned to the Soviet Union, and very quickly went back to the same life that she led after all that, you know, the gaiety of Paris, and when she had seemingly abandoned communism. Now she once again embraced communism. So there was the fickleness that you know, that was illustrated in that film. You know, that somehow they the film didn't, the writers didn't think that highly of her, you know, of her intellect or her character, in that she can just change her views, you know, like a will o' the wisp, you know, from one day to the next. But anyway, thank you, Cynthia, for that. And then Cynthia goes on. Thank you again very much for your generosity, Cynthia. And then she says, "But I still think that Ninotchka knew that if Leon really loved her, he'd find a way to get her back into his life." I don't know how you can do that. I mean, if you're in the Soviet Union, you're in the Soviet Union. I mean, it's I mean, she got lucky that the Soviet authorities allowed her out. Again, I don't think that was in any way realistic, because as far as the Soviet authorities would have been concerned, I'm not sure they were that happy with what she had done in Paris. I doubt whether they would have allowed her to travel again for a good number of years, not within a year or two. Now, Leon would obviously have tried to go to the Soviet Union, but here the guy in the visa office refused to issue him with a visa. I mean, she couldn't have foreseen that. But even if he came to her in the Soviet Union, can one imagine a duke like Leon really, making a life for himself in the Soviet Union? I mean, somebody who's used to the good life, the high life of Paris, is really going to settle down in kind of drab, dreary Moscow, and I don't really see it. So I mean, she may have thought that, but it was pretty unlikely. You have to say, that's, you just have to accept as part of life that they're never going to see each other again. Anyway, which is exactly what happened. Yeah, in the film. Yeah, you apparently haven't seen enough romance films to know that stories like that often end that way. No, I take your point. I mean, I have seen romance films, and you're absolutely right. Most of them do end that way, but I don't think it's very plausible. I remember this is a sort of a. I mean, it's a comedy, but it's kind of also a political film. So you have to say, well, how believable was this? I mean, it's nice. It's a nice ending. I mean, everyone wants to see a happy ending, but I didn't think it was a terribly plausible ending. Anyway, and the only reason she appears to be changing on the dime, as you put it, is because she was in love, and that's what women often do when they're in love. But you, being a man, I don't expect you to know much about such. I Yeah, look, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I agree that that's how that's what not the bit about my lack of understanding, but I mean your point about yeah, she's in love, and so she's kind of fickle, and but if that's the case, if it is all because she's in love and she kind of changes her mind from one day to the next, it doesn't really say much for her. So it's like, well, the Soviet that you supposedly she's this the new woman. She seems very much like like a very traditional woman. She kind of changes her mind according to what man she's with, and that's maybe that's the comedy. That's part of the charm and the comedy of the film. I mean, it's a very old-fashioned and kind of a conservative film, and I guess the filmmaker, that's how the filmmakers saw her. But she's not she wasn't in any way a very impressive person. I mean, just okay, she's like any other woman. She comes along with one set of views, then she meets a man, completely abandons that, then gives up a man, goes back to her to the views that she'd had before. Then she reunites with him, and then she abandons those views again. Okay, I mean, it's funny, it's entertaining, but it's not. It doesn't speak very well for her. But look, I mean, it's a good entertaining film, and it's the fact that we're discussing it in this way shows there's a lot there to think about. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And then Cynthia says, anyways, you recall Gaston, Leon's butler, said to Leon that he doesn't want to share alike with him at all because, unlike Leon, he's got money in the bank. That leads me to believe that Leon may indeed was like so many aristocrats back then who were deep in hock and merely living on credit, which is all true for today's aristocracy. But sadly, that's also now true of commoners like Gaston. Is that because finance has come to rule over everything in our economy? No, I think that's very perceptive. Is that yes, he was a kind of a middle class person, Gaston. He was a butler, but he had all the prudence and carefulness of the middle class, which is you save money. You don't go into debt because you need money for a rainy day. There'll be a moment you're going to need that money. So yeah, that's absolutely. So it was very much, you have the middle class. This is the virtue of the middle class, which is you're careful with money. You're not wasteful. And then you have the dissolute aristocracy, who live on credit, who that he doesn't even pay his butler. People lend him money, or he gets free drinks and free meals from his rich friends. So yeah, that's right. But it's also interesting, and again, it shows the conservatism of the film, that when Leon tries to persuade Gaston about the virtues of socialism or communism, and he starts reciting some things from Marx, is because Leon has suddenly started taking to reading Marx. Gaston is disgusted and appalled by the things he's saying. He says, I never think of myself as sort of the equal of my social betters. And then when he says, don't you want to kick me sometimes? So no, absolutely, I do not. And so in the way that presented it, that hey, the socialists, the communists, they're trying to appeal to I don't know, the people who are the wage earners, and they're not getting anywhere with these wage earners, because the wage earners are not buying into anything that the communists are saying. And so that was part of the humor of it, that hey, you're trying to proselytize people, but these people really, not only can you not proselytize them, they absolutely loathe these kinds of communist slogans. So that was again part of the humor of the film. But your point is right, is that now everyone lives on credit, and you no longer have that sort of the prudence that that was used to be exhibited by the bourgeoisie, which is that you invest your money, you live modestly, frugally, and you save money. You save money, for either for a rainy day or for buying a property, which is always a good investment. But you don't get yourself into debt and therefore become dependent on someone else. But that indeed has definitely disappeared. So yeah, the sort of the Gastons of the world are no longer around. So. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And then Robert, thank you so much, Robert. Thank you. Appreciate your generosity. It says, on July the 4th, 1821, Secretary of State John Quincy Adams gave his famous speech about America, that she goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. Yes, she's the well-wisher to the freedom and independence of all. She's the champion and vindicator only of her own. I'm wondering, when is the last time a U.S. Secretary of State so opined? I can't remember. You're absolutely right. I'm thinking that the closest any politician has come to saying anything like that obviously was Pat Buchanan when he ran in 1992, 1996, and 2000. So he was kind of enunciating those kinds of statements. The problem was that back in the 1990s, it seemed like America could do anything. I mean, that was the unipolar moment. So Buchanan's words weren't really, didn't fall on fertile ground, and he really didn't do terribly well in any of those three elections. But had Buchanan been running, say, 20 years later, when Trump ran, then I think Buchanan may well have had a much more effective run. He would have done much better in 2016. than he did in the 90s, and he would have been a much more articulate spokesman for the non-interventionist position than Trump ever was, because I think he had obviously he was a much better read than Trump. I mean, he's thought about these things much more than Trump had, and so he might have been a more effective communicator and a more effective candidate than Trump proved to be. So that's Pat Buchanan. But the only other person that I can think of is George McGovern, who ran in 1972 as a non-interventionist and as a sort of populist, a kind of a leftish populist, but much more of a genuine populist than Bernie Sanders ever was. I mean, I think that McGovern, I think, genuinely was anti-war. Sanders never was genuinely anti-war. Sanders has always been partisan. Sanders has always been, Republican wars are bad, but Democrat wars are good. I mean, he's a fraud. He was an absolute fraud. I was against Iraq. You go against the Iraq war. Well, you're only against the Iraq war because it was done by George W. Bush. Had Bill Clinton or Obama done this, I mean, you would have supported it. So, which is why he supported the bombing of Yugoslavia. He didn't speak out against the bombing of Libya. So, he's a fraud. But McGovern, I think, was the real deal. And McGovern had, he had been a fighter pilot in World War II, so he had seen action. So he had a, good, distinguished military record. And so that gave him plausibility as anti-war. But when he delivered his speech, a very, very powerful, very memorable speech at the 1972 Democratic Convention, this was the Come Home America speech. He was sort of echoing that John Quincy Adams line, which is, well, we've got problems at home. And we really can't go around the world, sorting out the problems of people in Southeast Asia, the problems of people in Africa and the Middle East or wherever. We really have urgent issues at home to be dealing with. And so he kept saying this, with "Come Home, America." And it was powerful. I mean, it was no question. I mean, he touched a nerve. And of course, he then became, hated by the political establishment. Obviously, he was hated by the Republicans, and that speech would have had more effect if he had delivered it at the normal time when you deliver your acceptance speech, which is, I think, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I mean, that's when you deliver your acceptance speech. But in those days, the Democrats were fighting among themselves, and they had all kinds of squabbles about rule changes and so on. So by the time all these disputes were resolved among the Democrat delegates, it was already 3 a.m. Well, you deliver a speech at 3 a.m., chances are not too many people are going to hear it. So it just didn't have the effect I think it should have done. But I mean, but that I think is the closest that I can think of. Maybe there are others, but almost all political leaders that get anywhere far in American politics are espousing the opposite line, that America has a mission to spread freedom, democracy around the world, and that the only people who are against this mission of spreading freedom and democracy around the world are isolationists, and so and isolationists of the right and the left. I mean, there was a Richard Haas, that kind of big foreign policy establishment type. He's served in one administration after another. He was a president of the Council on Foreign Relations up until very recently. And, he's a regular at Morning Joe. And he was on Morning Joe the other day berating Trump, for this putting this message, this terrible, horrific message that you shouldn't deliver, that somehow Americans should be addressing their own problems rather than addressing the problems of the world. He thinks this is an absolute outrage that any politician would say something so sacrilegious. That what you mean? We should worry about our manufacturing industry in decline. We should worry about the state of our healthcare. We should worry about the state of our infrastructure. No. We have to worry about Ukraine. We have to, worry about Mali. That's what we need to address. And so he said, "Oh, this is always a siren song in American politics. Whether it's on the right or the left, this is a siren song of isolationism. Somehow we're not, interested in the rest of the world. We're only interested in our own affairs. That's the most horrible thing imaginable." So he was being, doling out his condemnations, even-handedly. Yeah, Trump, but of course, there are people on the left who have said this. I mean, he didn't mention McGovern, but obviously McGovern would have been the closest to that. Anyway, thank you so much, Robert. And then Dan Rock says, Trump is being well and truly wound up by the establishment and Democrats. Yep, absolutely. Clearly, he isn't a savvy politician. He's falling for all the provocations. It was obvious in the Kamala debate. I agree. I couldn't agree more. I think that's this thing with Iran. Had he maintained any of the skepticism that he had back in 2017, 2018, 2019 about the intelligence agencies, when he said somehow, I'm happy with the assurances from the Russians. I trust them. He didn't quite say it in those terms, but he seemed to. I trust what the Russians saying more than what the CIA are telling me. Then he should have done that, but he in fact didn't. And remember, the intelligence agencies throughout the years of his presidency lied to him, because you remember when at the time of the Skripals and the supposed poisoning attempt of the Skripals, and there was this mass expulsion of Russian diplomats, and so the British expelled them, and then everyone in Europe, and then of course America was supposed to expel them. But Trump wasn't really very happy. He didn't quite see why Americans should expel so many Russian diplomats, and so his director of national intelligence, I forgot the name. It was this woman. Her name now escapes me. She came to him, and so she was the director of national intelligence. Said, "Well, this poison. Yeah, it may be that the Skripals were not poison, but this bread was laced with this Novichok, and the ducks ate this bread laced with Novichok, and these ducks died. Many ducks died from this Novichok." And so when Trump heard this, even though Trump isn't a particular animal lover, I think he's about the only president in U.S. history who hasn't had any pets in the White House, he was so moved by this talk of the dead ducks that he signed off on this on expelling 60 diplomats from the United States, including, which is quite outrageous, including Russian diplomats assigned to the United Nations. So they're not even it says representing assigned to the U.S. government. They are assigned to the United Nations. So they're actually United Nations diplomats, something that the United States cannot tamper with. It cannot tamper in any way with the United Nations. But so he knows that they were lying to him. They lied to, just even on that small issue, just to get him to sign off on the expulsion of the diplomats. They lied to him about these dead ducks. So he knows all this, and then along comes this Avril Haines, an Obama hack. This is not a person who's well disposed towards you. Have you already forgotten what Obama did to you? Obama sabotaged your presidency. Obama signed off on spying on Trump. Obama made sure that Trump's presidency would be mired in recriminations about Russian collusion. So this is an Obama hack. Tells him, "Oh, Iran is trying to kill you." And instead of thinking what when any sensible person would say, I think I'm being set up here. Somebody is trying to get me to do something. I think I'll pass. I'll wait to see the actual intelligence. Let me show me the actual intelligence. But he didn't do that. And so I absolutely agree with you that he's being led by the nose. And you would have thought at this stage he would know better. This isn't 2015 anymore. 2015, 2016. We're prepared to cut him some slack. He's very inexperienced. He doesn't know how devious these people are. But now, we're 8 years on, and you're still being taken for a ride by people who are obviously not well disposed towards you. So yeah, I just found it astonishing that he bought this hook, line, and sinker. NKMRD, thank you very much again for your generosity. He says that the U.S. is in wars all the time, yet it doesn't seem to disturb their foreign policy so much. Nobody questioned the dollar, even though the U.S. is playing with fire all the time. Russia seems to be very cautious not to hurt their foreign relations. It is somehow strange, but the USA is very, very good at selling pretty much everything. Well, the United States is shrewd in picking opponents that are to fight against, that are easy to defeat. That they're always somehow making sure that they can't really do very much. I mean, Vietnam was more protracted, but even so, the Americans basically set themselves a kind of a limited goal. I mean, it was not so much that the Vietnamese were impossible to defeat, although the Vietnamese, certainly the Viet Cong, they obviously fought with great bravery and tenacity. But ultimately, what proved problematic for the United States was the possibility, distant but nonetheless real, that China would get into that war. They had a bad experience. They burnt their fingers in Korea when China got into the war. They didn't really think China would do that. China got into the war, and the United States was clearly worried that China would again get into this war, and that's why the Americans just set themselves quite limited goals in Vietnam, not to cross any borders, not to send their troops, too far. They make limited incursions, but not in any way in which China might get involved. So that's why the Americans didn't invade North Vietnam. They never invaded it because they thought, well, if we invade North Vietnam, then that could provoke Chinese involvement. So it was quite limited in what the Americans did. But even so, it proved to be quite difficult. But America is has the dollar. It has the great economic strength. It has a very powerful network of alliances, all of whom just simply follow the American line. Much more so now, incidentally, than back in the 1960s, back in the Vietnam days. Now, of course, that NATO bloc is always on hand to support the United States. But the the question then is, most of the time, the Americans, they fight against Yugoslavia, they fight against Iraq, and Iraq much weakened, incidentally, after the sanctions. I mean, the sanctions had been going on for more than 10 years. By the time the Americans invaded in 2003, the sanctions had been in place for 13 years. So Iraq was a really, really enfeebled adversary to the Americans. And of course, the Americans won pretty easily. So it's always a very limited operation. And that goes back to the point that I made, which is, great powers remain great powers as long as they don't fight wars against other great powers. As long as you fight limited wars against powers that can't really do much against you, then you're okay. But the fastest way of ceasing to be a great power is if you fight another great power, and that's what happened in World War I and World War II, which is why so many of the great powers that had existed before World War I ceased to be great powers at the end, and then same with World War II. The great powers at the beginning were no longer great powers at the end. So yeah, that's how it works with the American. So when you say it doesn't disturb their foreign policy so much, well, it doesn't, as long as it can retain minimal casualties. If America started to suffer serious casualties, then I think things would get different. But Iraq, Afghanistan, they suffered casualties, but not casualties such that America would say this enough and no further. But even then, I mean, if you go back to Iraq, Bush made very clear very early on that America was going to withdraw. So it was, I can't remember when he did that, mission accomplished. So it was really, it wasn't really that long and so major a commitment. And you only sent in professional soldiers. In other words, you're only sending in mercenaries. These are people who are going into battle, but who are getting paid for it. So it's not like you're sending in a conscript army, and that really is, that usually is very problematic. So anyway, so nobody questioned the dollar, even though the U.S. is playing with fire all the time. Yeah, well, all of that is right. I mean, the issue of the dollar, that may come to hurt America at some point. You can't keep messing around and seize other countries' dollar assets and then not suffer the consequences. But you're right. Russia is very cautious and doesn't want to hurt their foreign relations. Russia is very cautious, but the problem with being so cautious and Russia and wanting to maintain good relations with others is that it hampers your ability to win a war decisively, because at some point you're going to have to bite the bullet and do some very nasty things that that's going to infuriate some of your allies, because at this stage, it's victory is a long way down the road, and that's never good when you keep thinking about victory. Oh well, maybe another year or maybe 2 years. That's never good, because you never know what's going to happen in the year or 2 years. But it's no question that is the point. I mean, if you are worried about what India is going to think and what China is going to think, then that's going to hamper you, when making the critical decisions. And that's like the whole thing about how Russia is going to arm some of America's adversaries, and that somehow, that's going to be a response to what the Americans have been doing in Ukraine. Well, it isn't really. I mean, you start arming the Houthis. Well, what's that going to do for you? The moment you do that, the Saudis are going to go to Moscow and say, this is not acceptable to us. You can't go around arming these people. We hate these people. And again, or if you arm, let's say you arm Hezbollah, but even then you can't. America can't arm Hezbollah because Russia can't arm Hezbollah, or at least not to any great extent, because that would upset its relations with Israel. Russia wants to maintain good relations with Israel. And then of course, and then same with issue with Iran. So you say, well, you want to maintain good relations with Israel, but that of course upsets your relations with Iran. So you say, oh, we're going to have, we want to maintain our good relations with Iran. But what's that doing? That's interfering with Russia's good relations with Azerbaijan, because Iran and Azerbaijan don't see eye to eye, to say the least. So the more Russia gets close to Iran, the more its relations with Azerbaijan deteriorate. So the point is that if you start doing this, well, we need good relations with everybody, then ultimately you're not going to be able to do anything, because you're basically trying to take both sides on any issue, and that doesn't really help you. And particularly on this, what you need to focus on absolutely right now is how to win this war in Ukraine, how to do it as expeditiously as possible. And doing all this stuff about, Iran and this and Saudi Arabia and the Houthis, that's not going to get you very far. Anyway, go back. Yes, Robert says, in 1993, Kuwait claimed to have foiled an assassination plot orchestrated by Saddam Hussein against former President George H.W. Bush. Yes, that's right. That was in the early months of the Clinton administration. In light of what you point out about Avril Haines' claims about Iran and Trump, I wonder just how true were the Kuwaitis' claims made against Hussein. I never believed for one moment that the Kuwait's claims about Saddam Hussein were in the slightest. I think the whole thing was a setup in order to show that Clinton was a tough guy, to reassure the national security state that Clinton could hold his own against all his predecessors. Remember, up until then, Clinton wasn't taken entirely seriously. I mean, he was just seen as a kind of a lightweight governor of Arkansas, more interested in women than in advancing American national interests. And so he had to prove that he was indeed a tough guy, and he wouldn't hesitate to bomb Iraq. And so that was very early on. I think it was maybe just a few weeks into after the inauguration of Bill Clinton that he was already bombing, and that sealed the deal. The national security state was happy. Yeah, Bill Clinton is our boy. He's not going to go soft. He's not going to be some wimpy guy who will be easily wound. The bad guys in the world are going to wind him around their little finger. No. That he's our man. And then of course he turned out to be even more belligerent, against many countries than George Bush had been. So no, absolutely. I never believed at the time. I thought that, isn't that convenient that Saddam? I mean, why would Saddam Hussein do that? I mean, it makes no sense to do something like that against George H.W. Bush, because Bush was already out. He's gone. So if you're resentful towards Bush, then you can be satisfied, because you'll say, well, hey, I've had my revenge. Bush lost the election. Everyone expected Bush to win the election after his great victory in the Gulf War, but instead Bush lost. So you've got everything you achieved. If you then try to assassinate him, you're threatening to lose everything you've achieved, because now the Americans are going to come after you. And in fact, all that it served to do is that he got Bill Clinton, who he may have thought, foolishly, but nonetheless, he may have thought, hey, Clinton may be more accommodating to us than Bush had been. Maybe Clinton will lift some sanctions or whatever. Of course, Clinton wouldn't, but at least Saddam Hussein might have thought that. So absolutely, I don't for one moment believe any of that stuff about a plot to assassinate Bush. And then Dan Rock says, I have to say, I enjoy watching the movies on Monday. Despite everything being available these days, there's still something nostalgic about a weekly way to watch a movie or an episode of a series. No, that's very nice to hear. Yeah, no, I think so. And what we try to do is to show, older movies, some of the classics. I think it's always nice. That there used to be a time that I seem to remember, growing up in England when you turn on the telly and they would be showing old films, the all-time greats, the classics, and they would show them at prime time. So remember, it's like I think 8 o'clock on Saturday they'd be showing, classic movies. Now, of course, you don't get any of that. Now it's all these. The recent schlock from Hollywood, so you don't get to see that. So I think this Monday night the movies we kind of revived some of that old the older traditions. So anyway, thank you so much, Dan Rock. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you, appreciate that. Anne Marie, always very good to see you. So thank you so much, Anne Marie, and thank you for your comment about Jacques Baud. The Swiss guy, was a very intelligent Swiss guy, and Anne Marie posted this interview with him on our locals board, and I think everyone should read it. I mean, everyone should watch the. It's on Rumble. It's a little long. The interview is about 2 hours, but I think everyone should watch it. He's a very smart guy, and I think as Anne Marie pointed out, he's one of the few good Swiss exports. So someone who's Swiss that we can enjoy. So, but anyway, thank you so much, Anne Marie. Thank you for your generosity. Summer Petros says, indeed, George will analyze and, where necessary, destroy the narrative plot of romantic comedy films. Yes, exactly. I mean, we need to sort of get to the bottom of these films and crack the implicit plots and the implicit assumptions underlying them. But I think it's a reflection of the better the movie, the more one can discuss. I mean, we'll take different views, as we talked about Ninotchka. I mean, I have my view. I mean, Cynthia has her view, and other people have their views on the film. But anyway, Summer Petros, really appreciate that. Thank you. And then Robert says Gina Haspel. Gina Haspel was indeed the person I was thinking of. She was she the director of national intelligence, or she was head of the CIA? I can't. Maybe she was head of the CIA, but it was definitely Gina Haspel who told Trump about the ducks, the dead ducks, which persuaded him, because the crucial thing was to persuade Trump to sign off on expelling 60 diplomats. He really didn't want to do it, because I think the UK expelled something like 23 diplomats, and then everyone else, went down the line. So the UK 23, and then France, I don't know how many, 10, 15, Germany, same, and then but everybody. So every single NATO country, chipped in to expel Russian diplomats, and then you get Hungary down the way to Hungary, and Hungary expelled one diplomat. So they got 23. Hungary expels one diplomat. I'm sure, I don't know, but I'm sure it wasn't. Nobody was actually expelled. It was probably some diplomats was already planning to leave Hungary anyway. Had been assigned somewhere else, and so they said, okay, fine. We're asking him to leave, And so, but he was already going anyways. But he was, everyone else did it. As you went down the line, 2, 3, 4, 5, down to Hungary, one diplomat expelled. So, and then Robert says about Gina Haspel, and wasn't Haspel also the one who put Trump up to assassinating Soleimani? I don't know that was the case. I thought that that was more the Israelis who did that with Soleimani. That was, at least that's what Trump himself has been suggesting, that this was a joint plan of action to take out Soleimani, but then Israel kind of backed out. He claims this, Netanyahu kind of backed out in the last minute and let the Americans carry the can. And I think that's another issue that's a bone of contention between Trump and Netanyahu, along with, of course, Netanyahu's ingratitude, the ingratitude that he demonstrated when he recognized Biden's election win. He was among the earliest of world leaders who recognized Biden as the winner of the 2020 election. This, of course, infuriated Trump because, after all I've done for you, the usual thing. And then you say, well, what the hell did you expect? I mean, who do you think you're dealing with? But again, I mean, given everything you know about Netanyahu, this is the time for Trump to distance himself from Netanyahu and say, no, I mean, we don't support Netanyahu's war goals. He's somebody who doesn't have the best interests of the United States at heart, and we should, think only what's good for the United States, not what's good for Israel. But he's not saying that. Instead, he's taking this view of what's good for Israel, and that's not a good look, and particularly not a good look when you're supposedly an America firster. And then Dan Rock asks, is the board interview the one he did with Eve Bartlett? Yes, that is it. Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. And then Dan Rock says, Gina Haspel, Miss Torture. Yes, exactly. She was the one who was involved in all of the tortures in the CIA, torture chambers, not in the United States, because they could only conduct these tortures elsewhere. And this is part of the rendition program, the extreme rendition program. So she was very much involved in all of that. I think that film, I never saw it, the one about the killing of bin Laden. I think the female character, the hero who kind of tortures the suspects to get the information on bin Laden, I think that was based on Gina Haspel. And then Dan Rock says, yeah, Israelis. Yeah, it was 100% Israelis about the on the Soleimani. Let's see if we can now. So Mary Grossman says, late to movie watching, so went back to the first and enjoy the intro by George. Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate that. So now let's see if there's anything on God. Here we go. So here we have let's see. Let's see if there's anything on among the YouTube. The people, I tell you, if you want to get this the personal touch, a conversation with Gagglers, just please subscribe to Locals, the Gaggle.locals.com. You get all sorts of great stuff on our site. And you get to enjoy the conversation with Gagglers. So just again, ideally it'd be good if you could pay the subscription fee, but even if you join for free, you get a lot of stuff, um, for without having to pay. Essay says George is nothing if not amiable, even when melancholy darkness is weighing on his chest like an incubus. No, I think that's true. I mean, that's that's the two kind of often go together. Melancholy and amiability. So yeah, no, I think it's true. But yeah, it's you have to accept that the sort of the melancholia that life imposes on you. And Essay Delendum says one thing in Zelensky's favor is he's not a big, fat, blubbery type. He's not lazy. He's just hopeless and almost worthy of pity. I don't know. I don't know if I pity him. Yeah, I mean, he's been a disaster for Ukraine. I think he had a chance to bring the conflict to an end. He had a chance. He had a mandate in 2019 when he won. Had a mandate to, pursue reconciliation with Russia. He had a mandate to pursue reconciliation with the people of the Donbass, and he blew it. And essentially, he's become a total toady of NATO's. He's led his country to disaster. He'll do all right for himself. Even when he's out of power, at some point he's going to be out of power. Yeah, he'll make out like a bandit. He'll go somewhere. He'll probably be welcomed. Everywhere in the Western world. He'll have gigs in think tanks at universities, and of course, he'll be living the life of Riley with all his ill-gotten gains. So, he'll be around for many years. Whatever happens to him in Ukraine, and. So Mr. Wonderful says, I assure you, hacks blamed on foreign countries such as Russia, China, Iran, etc., have always been influencing operations carried out by the CIA with Vault 7 tools for similar. Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, there's no question. And then Mr. Wonderful says, in 1948, the U.S. passed a law called the Smith-Mundt Act, which forbade the CIA to propagandize to the United States. In 2013, the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act was passed that allowed it. But of course, the CIA always got around it because the CIA controlled, American media. And that's something we know, that they always had their hands within the American media. So they had their own reporters embedded within newspapers and television networks, and then they always managed to get their message across. So this thing about how CIA doesn't interfere in domestic affairs, of course it does. It always has. Despite CIA doesn't do anything domestically. Of course it does. Mr. Wonderful says 2 weeks before the October the 7th, Netanyahu pulled out a map which had Palestine wiped off the map. That's when he had intelligence of October the 7th. Yeah, that was it. I think, he was essentially, when he showed that map, I think in September, whatever it was at the UN General Assembly meeting. And he showed that map, which said, hey, there's no Palestine on this map. This is the map of the new Middle East, where Israel would be making, a ton of money through all these various pipelines and networks and everything else, and that was in a way the culmination of the Abraham Accords. The whole point of the Abraham Accords was to eliminate, just evaporate the Palestinians. They just don't exist anymore. So that was that. There was you don't even have to say the two-state solution is no more. He said, well, how can there be a two-state solution? There isn't really anybody for whom you have to provide a state. They don't exist. Enjoy says the Jewish Israeli influence over American politics is something Jews never want to discuss. They hide behind anti-Semitism. Yeah, that was anti-Semitism. Yeah. Who was that? This is... Maddie says, Mr. Board is a great resource. I bought his book. Yeah, I agree. Jacques Board is a great resource. And then Essie Dillendam says, duck soup. Groucho, duck soup. Yeah, we need to, that's a thought about somehow maybe war and comedy. That could be, the satirization of war. I mean, duck soup is obviously, I mean, again, love and death is a possibility, but war and comedy and, satire on war, that's a good theme for a future the Gaggle screening. Anyway, my time is up. Thank you everybody who has joined me. Thank you for all of your questions, comments, suggestions. As I said, please subscribe to our channel, and then you can vote in Locals Board as to which film you would like to see screened next Monday. That's a very important vote. So please, if you haven't voted yet, then please vote. This weekend we'll do several podcasts, and next Monday we have a live stream with Peter, and then next Tuesday is going to be a live stream solo with me. So hope you'll all be there. Hope you can all join us. So thank you for today, and see you very soon. All the best. Good night. Bye-bye.